Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to docket number 250115, which is PIRA's front of the meter storage program docket. We are gathered here this morning for a technical meeting in this matter. We have an agenda in front of us today with a number of presentations that have been filed ahead of time, so I want to thank everyone for doing that. We do have time at the end of the agenda for comments from anyone who has not participated by giving a presentation. So we will definitely reserve time for that. After each presentation, we're hoping that folks have left enough time in their presentation slots to allow for questions. I know the authority staff have a number of questions on several of the presentations. As we typically do with technical meetings, if there is time for other stakeholders to ask questions at the end of the presentations, we will allow for that, but we do have a packed agenda today, so we will turn first to authority staff. A couple of housekeeping matters. We'll ask each set of presenters. I believe the authority does have everyone's slide decks, and we're happy to pull them up and control the slide deck. Equally happy for individual presenters to control your own slide deck, so really up to you. If this is your first time participating in a PIRA remote technical conference, a few things to cover, please. First, we do still use a court reporter. We're broadcasting to YouTube, but to maintain the transcript and the record, we ask that any questions or comments be verbalized, and that the individual making such question or comment identify yourself by name and affiliation. In other words, we ask that you refrain from using the chat function, as that is not part of the official record. So please do not use that function. When it comes time to ask questions, again, we will turn first to authority staff. If there is time for other questions, we will turn to the queue using the raise hand function under the reactions tab at the bottom of the screen. And again, if you participate at any point today, we ask that you make sure you are identifiable by name and affiliation for clarity of the record. I believe that's all the opening announcements that we have. So I want to thank everybody for participating today. It looks like we have a robust number of participants. So thank you in advance for joining us. And we will turn first to a joint presentation from our colleagues at the EDCs. I know we've split up the presentation into 4 subtopics, but I understand there's one slide deck. I think the authority staff are going to hold their questions until the end of the complete presentation. So we will welcome the presenters to the virtual stage. And if you can just start out by letting us know your preference on whether you intend to control the slide deck or if you would like Mr. Bumpin to. And good morning and welcome.
Good morning. If you didn't mind controlling the slide deck, that would be great. I'll do introductions while it's being pulled up. My name is Jen Schilling. I'm the Vice President of Grid Modernization for Eversource. And, on behalf of Eversource and Avangrid, we appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Storage is a transformational technology for the electric distribution system, transmission system. And so we're, pleased to be a part of a thoughtful discussion on the various ways that we can maximize its value in multiple applications. So I am joined today by Jennifer Key. She's going to walk us through some of the FERC considerations that we raised in the written comments. I'll provide a little bit of background and thoughts on a distribution value proposition. Also joined by Jennifer Runyon, who will present a little bit on the behind the meter program. We think it's important in the context of the broader discussion on how we can encourage and incent energy storage in various use cases to just kind of ground ourselves in what exists today. And then finally, Rob Whelan, Manager of Clean Energy Policy at UI, will walk us through some of the specific questions that were raised in the written comments regarding program design and kind of structure. So with that, if you didn't mind moving to the next slide. Okay, I think I just went through that, so maybe I'll turn it over to Jennifer Key, who's going to walk us through some for jurisdictional considerations.
Thank you, Jen. And again, I'm one of the three Jennifers here today from the law firm of Steptoe LLP. I specialize generally in FERC matters. I'm a FERC attorney, and jurisdiction is one of my specialties. And I came to be involved in this, the distributed front of the meter storage proceeding really only about a year and a half ago, once the issue of the wholesale distribution tariff arose. And because I had some experience with such tariffs in the past, and I do recognize by the time I became involved, there already had been some work on developing a front of the meter distributed storage program in Connecticut. So when I came in, obviously I looked at a lot of the documents that had already been produced. And what struck me is that, FERC's jurisdiction, has how it interplays with PURA's and the state's jurisdiction wasn't exactly reflected in the documents I was looking at. And so, I began to raise some issues with Eversource, who's my client. I'm really speaking on behalf of both companies, but I do represent Eversource. So I think the primary reason for the somewhat unusual appearance of a lawyer at a tech conference is to level set on our views and making sure whether we're all on the same jurisdictional page. And there are some jurisdictional issues sometimes that, can be difficult and contested, but just wanted to see if we were all on the same page, in particular, and answer questions in order to get us on the same page. Otherwise, for example, before I dive into the slides, one place that PURA clearly has jurisdiction is over the interconnection of distributed front of the meter storage. That's because the ISO New England and the TOs wanted to defer all distribution interconnections to the states rather than split it between FERC and the states. And I only raise this because, we noticed on, I think it was the Green Bank slides, there was sort of a, requirement to have an ISO New England interconnection service agreement. And I don't know if Green Bank was more looking at front of the meter storage as a whole, as opposed to distributed front of the meter storage. But, again, in seeing that, it was clear to me that not everyone was necessarily on the same page on jurisdiction. So moving on to discussing this first slide, given that I was called in because everyone said we need a wholesale distribution tariff for WDAT, what that meant to me was that distribution connected storage was going to buy power at wholesale prices, store it, and resell that stored power at wholesale, because in order to buy power at wholesale and use the WDAT, which is to deliver wholesale power, you of course have to resell it under, and that comes out of Order 841 at FERC. And then, if the power is bought at wholesale, the storage devices could participate in the wholesale or ISO New England capacity market, ancillary service markets, energy. On the other hand, if a storage device wants to sell a non-jurisdictional product like demand response or some other non-jurisdictional product, well, then it would buy power at retail and it wouldn't be able to use the WDAT. And one more thing to mention just before moving on to the next slide, again, looking at the slides of the other group, the clean energy trade groups had a clause on one slide that said resources would still buy and sell energy in the wholesale markets under WDAT rates. I just wanted to be clear, again, to level set, you cannot buy or sell energy under the WDAT. You can deliver wholesale energy under the WDAT. It has a set of rates for bringing energy in to charge the storage. There's no rate to sell the end. There's no delivery rate to sell the energy out. So I just wanted to be clear that we understand that the WDAT is a delivery only tariff and has nothing to do with the buying and selling of energy. Any sale of energy at wholesale, is usually done under a FERC market-based tariff when it's coming from standalone storage. And that's, of course, because standalone storage can't, if it's standalone, it can't qualify to be a qualifying facility. And again, get an exemption from FERC rate regulation, as many small renewable devices do. And so you can go ahead and again, the purchases, we're going to be at wholesale from the ISO New England market, purchasing the energy to be stored, if the WDAT was going to be used. And we can move on to the next slide. And I assume some of you are familiar with Order 2222 at FERC. And the main point I wanted to raise just on that order was the fact that it is true that FERC has said that distributed resources, can be used to participate in both state jurisdictional and FERC jurisdictional programs. But I just wanted to point out that there is some difficulty with storage in doing that. And that relates to what I just said. A storage device has to purchase energy to store, and anything it purchases at wholesale has to be used to be resold at wholesale. Anything purchased at retail can really be used for any reason, including wholesale sales, but you can't really commingle the two. You can't, there's no way to do the accounting, and it'd just be almost impossible if you thought about it to somehow, have this device being, charged with energy and then start using the energy for different, some for state jurisdictional products and some for FERC, because there'd have to be a way to segregate those purchases and do all the accounting. And obviously, the ISO New England market is settling every 5 minutes when you're purchasing energy. And there's obviously the retail, purchases are accounted for and metered completely differently. So I just wanted to make that point that for storage, it's sort of particularly difficult to, sell multiple jurisdictional products. And we can go on to the next slide, I think. So as reflected in Eversource's written comments, and based on the topics presented and the questions we saw on discovery, I really think Eversource, and after getting some input from me, it was difficult to understand exactly what the authority was proposing. Certainly there were documents that envisioned, and I understood the storage industry was interested in the storage resource fully participating in the ISO New England market, and in effect, an incentive being used to fill in a gap to the extent that their market revenues were not going to be sufficient to incentivize storage to locate in Connecticut. And as I said, that was one option, and that's really reflected here. As we tried to write written comments, we came up with a couple different constructs. There's a construct where the distributed storage purchases wholesale power from ISO New England. That energy being stored is delivered under the WDAT and ISO New England tariff. And the storage resources then resell that energy at wholesale. And there was two options. You could sell it back to the EDCs, who could use it to reduce their load or peak shave, or they could sell it back to the ISO New England market. And one of the issues, of course, with what I call construct one, option one, is that, the authority does not, the authority does not have the legal authority to make utility distribution companies purchase wholesale power from any particular entity, and certainly not at any particular price. So we didn't really think that, because it was construct one, option one would be completely voluntary. We didn't really think that was a meaningful option. You know, unless the utilities saw that there would be true ratepayer benefits from that option and were willing to do that voluntarily. The other construct we sort of saw was this notion, I think we've seen it even more in the discovery we've just received, is that the distributed storage buys retail power. We don't even worry about the WDAT. They store it, and there's some kind of contract between the storage and the EDCs. And really, it's a form of demand response that would allow the EDCs to reduce load and peak shave. But that, you know, anything sold by the storage device would not be subject to FERC jurisdiction. And that was a different model, but that really didn't seem to be the model that the storage industry had been, as far as we could tell, proposing. But that's why we sort of developed the constructs, because we you know, were a little mystified once we talked about FERC jurisdiction and the options as to where Pura was thinking about going. And you could move on to the next slide. Next slide. And so we just wanted to mention finally in my closing of my part is, you know, what are the FERC guardrails under the different options that, you know, and under construct one, as I mentioned, one guardrail, of course, is if the power is sold to the EDCs, you know, that they're, you know, Pura does lack the legal authority to compel those purchases. And under option two of construct one, the most important limitation really relates to the Hughes v. Talon case, which basically said that incentive payments for entities that are participating in the wholesale market have to be untethered or cannot be tethered to actual wholesale market participation. That is, if a resource is only paid if it's dispatched or it's dependent on being dispatched in the wholesale market under Hughes, the Supreme Court has found that to be a subsidy that is not legal because it basically it results in the state through its incentive affecting the wholesale price of power. And, you know, there are sort of, you know, as the Supreme Court mentioned, there's certainly legal ways that a state can subsidize certain types of generation or storage, but it really does have to be untethered from actual wholesale market participation. And that case, they gave some examples, you know, just in the form of direct subsidies, taxes, and whatnot, of ways to, you know, the state could achieve its goals without running afoul of Hughes v. Talon. So those are sort of the, you know, FERC jurisdiction guardrails and limits we wanted to put out there for discussion. And I now move it back to Jen Schilling. You're still on mute.
Great, thanks, Jen. If you didn't mind flipping to the next slide, great. So I think one of the things about energy storage that is, you know, I think has been widely recognized is given its versatility, it has the ability to deliver a lot of different value propositions to the grid, or the ability to store electricity and use it when it is needed, is a level of, you know, flexibility that is, you know, particularly valuable for different types of use cases. So we did want to just, you know, kind of start a conversation about the different types of value that would be be contemplated under a front of the meter storage incentive program, and kind of just make sure we're all using common language on, you know, where those sources of benefits will be. So I'll go row by row and kind of walk through each of them briefly. So when we think about the first row of distribution grid benefits, so that could be local peak shaving. So you think about a feeder or a substation that's during an overload, being able to provide voltage support in areas with high solar penetration, avoided need for infrastructure, which might come from, hey, I was able to reduce peak, and that means that I didn't need to build some distribution infrastructure. Mentioned DER integration. So these are all things that that technology can provide. But then when you think about third-party front of the meter, you know, as we've discussed in the non-wire solution docket, and I think we have a reference here on the slide, the use of third-party resources as distribution grid assets has some, you know, serious concerns for the EDCs as the folks responsible for delivering safe and reliable service. Most notably, the fact that you know, we need to be able to count on it at the same level of an asset that we design, build, own, maintain, and dispatch. So that third-party front of the meter, without that capability, it can't really deliver on those value propositions. Now, you know, that is distinct from third-party behind the meter storage. Difference being very distributed, smaller resources. You know, they can provide distribution grid benefit if, you know, aggregated in a way that that is, you know, basically you could think about statistical availability, right? I don't have to, not all of them need to show up. So there's a little bit of a difference there. And then EDC owned, as I said, EDC owned front of the meter storage would be akin to any other distribution asset that we have. So that's, you know, that's kind of the construct for distribution grid benefits. Very similar as resiliency benefits. I think the notice mentioned, you know, the ability to have targeted resiliency benefit for low and moderate income customers, environmental justice communities, but it's a similar concept. Resiliency, similar to reliability, is you know, is an EDC core function, and you know, the third party front of the meter is not something we're set up to count on. Third party, and I think we'll talk about it in the next section, third party behind the meter for sure can provide resiliency benefits, as it's you think about a behind the meter battery can be used for customer resiliency in the event of loss of grid supply, as well as a participant in a demand response program. What can, and I think this is what kind of, you know, some of the comments on FERC jurisdiction, you know, brought up, is the front of the meter can, because it's distributed across the entire grid, front of the meter can provide system level, broad, you know, across the entire, you know, Connecticut service territory, across the entire ISO New England service territory. We can, you know, we can assume that front of the meter storage will be able to provide some peak shaving benefit for the entire system. So any resource can do that. And then, you know, when just in terms of the comments from Jen Key that we just heard, just need to make sure that whatever we get, whatever is designed is delivering those benefits without having any concerns with respect to what market they're participating in and how the jurisdiction falls between one or the other. So that is all I had. So I know we're going to hold questions to the end. So I will turn it over to Jen Runyon, third Jen, to walk us through just a few considerations on the behind the meter programs.
Thanks, Jen. I appreciate it. Okay, so yes, I am very happy to go through just a few high-level slides to look at how to grow storage in Connecticut efficiently, effectively, and affordably. Okay, so take a look at here. This is why are our customers installing behind the meter energy storage? Why are they participating in the ESS program? Well, for residential, they're looking for that battery backup. So when the power goes out, they want to stay powered up. If they have solar, they understand that they cannot use their solar panels if the power goes out. So they really need a battery. That's why they're interested in it. And of course, that we have some really nice incentives for them as well in the residential sector. For CNI, there's an additional benefit. So in addition to the resiliency and the solar self-consumption and the incentives, there's also the ability for them to reduce their demand charges. So that's a true bill savings. Refresher, a demand charge is set by a business. It's set at the moment they use the most energy in any given month. So that means that their bill fluctuates every month based on that demand charge. But what they can do with that battery is program it to look for those peaks in their own use and shave them right off. So that really lowers their bill, and they get that fourth benefit of using a behind the meter battery. So let's look at the next slide and see how that's playing out today in the program. So here's where we stand with the ESS program. After 3 years, we have a total of 160 megawatts enrolled. Now, online is not that much. We have much of that 152 megawatts in the CNI space, and about half of those 8 megawatts in the residential space is just committed, but it's coming. And the pipeline looks really, really positive, great for CNI. Over 150 megawatts are enrolled. And so you can really see that those CNI businesses appreciate the value that behind the meter storage is delivering to them. All right, so last slide. Since we're talking about setting up a new program here, let's just go over a few lessons that we have learned in the 3 years that we've been running the ESS program. So first of all, let's think about program requirements. I like to remember the KISS rule, keep it simple. Complicated formulas lead to developer confusion, and administrative costs grow every time we add new rules. Every time we add a new formula or a new jurisdiction or a new place to target, we are adding to those administrative costs. Second point is on interconnection. All stakeholders, everyone needs to be aware that interconnection is a very complex process. It is highly recommended that you try to meet with the EDC interconnection group before you submit your project. And right now I'm speaking to those storage developers. If you can get a meeting, and again, that's what those program administrators are there for, to help you facilitate, that really helps get everybody on the same page before you submit anything. Again, be aware, expect delays and expect additional costs. And last, don't apply to interconnect before you've got your project fully figured out. If you have all your ducks in a row, interconnection will go very smoothly. But go into it with open eyes. It will be timely. It will be costly. That's just what it is. All right, last on data. Data management, obviously extremely important when we're talking about battery storage and incentives. We need to measure those dispatches so we can reward them accordingly. So developers need to know how we're going to be receiving that data, how they're going to be transmitting that data so they can put in the right equipment. Program administrators and the program evaluator need to understand where that data is going to live and how they're going to access it and reward their customers and evaluate the program. Okay, well, that's all for me. So I'm going to turn it over to Rob to go over some program structure.
Hey everybody, my name is not Jen, but so we appreciate the opportunity to comment on some of the topical things we included in the written comments that we filed with the authority a few weeks ago. So I'm going to start off talking about the program megawatt cap. And when we talk about this subject, we kind of want to take a step back and do a little bit of a history lesson here and extend on what Jen just mentioned in her slides earlier. So Public Act 2153 established 3 specific milestones. They were 300 megawatts by end of 2024, 300 megawatts by the end of 2027, and 300 megawatts by the end of 2030. Currently, the Energy Storage Solutions Program, as Jen noted, has 160 megawatts in various stages of development. About 4 megawatts of that is in service right now. So we do have a gap of about 480 megawatts to meet that behind the meter storage goal of 580 megawatts over the next 5 years. In doing the math here, right, we can combine that 580 with the 200 megawatt deep project that was recently awarded. Still leaves us with a shortfall of about 640 megawatts to reach that 1,000 megawatt goal by 2030. So we don't really have specific details around the limits for a proposed front of the meter storage program, because there are unknowns, right? So future procurements might plan or may have planned the anticipated average size of front of the meter storage projects that developers will be bringing into the state. We think that any limits around megawatt caps should be gradually implemented to match the milestones outlined in the Public Act 2153. Also, as we noted in our response, well, UI's response specifically, I'm referring to CAE 009, we really need to determine that if a front-of-the-meter storage program would be mainly used to balance the supply and demand of electricity as more of these renewable energy sources come online, or will the ultimate goal be to help reduce the need to build new power plants, as this will be a key factor in setting any of these program megawatt caps. And we try to display on the side here, just kind of give a visual of where we are today and what we have to fill as far as the shortfall goes. And you can go to the next slide, please. So competitive procurement design. I know there's been a lot of comments submitted about this. I think in the recent set of IRs, we'll probably end up opining on this a little bit more. But in the original comments filed, we proposed two main approaches for setting the first year program price cap. One of them is a cost-based approach, which covers total ownership costs and ensures a reasonable profit. And then a market-based approach, which is based on potential revenue from market services. This procurement design does take cues from the non-residential energy solutions program, and it does offer flexibility and higher capacities, which I think we should expect with what some of the developers will offer from a project perspective. So what we're doing is we're basically taking some aspects of that NRES program that we could consider, and then obviously would modify them to fit within the role of the front of the meter program. So first off, instead of recommending an annual procurement process, we would recommend using a multi-year tranche schedule, similar to what we've done for the ESS program already. This approach would help manage risk related to market volatility, control administrative costs, project pipeline management, and it also ensures price predictability and consistent pricing, which obviously can encourage more participation. Second recommendation is that we consolidate project categories. So in NRES right now, we have multiple project categories within that project, and it kind of dictates how projects are awarded. So what we would do is we'd like to match the average size of front-of-the-meter storage projects. Again, we don't know what developers have in mind from an average storage project size, but we would definitely have to get to that number so we could, put a category in place for this. Additionally, we would want to highlight projects that are connected primarily to critical infrastructure and are more tied to large-scale type resilience efforts. You can go to the next slide, please. So for eligibility requirements, I think it's pretty much what we already have considered a gold standard with the Energy Storage Solutions Program. We think that to participate, projects should complete, obviously, the standard interconnection process and use DERMS for visibility as well as control. Contractors should be registered with the authority, and they should have experience with energy storage system installations. Any front-of-the-meter storage system will need to interface with each of the respective DERMS aggregators for the EDCs to call dispatch events. And the EDCs, which this is kind of important, we will need to maintain operational control of the storage systems if the performance is going to be tied to an incentive payment and is being used for reliability benefit. Additionally, various codes and standards, such as ANSI, IEEE, The UL safety standards such as UL 9540, 9540A, any adopted Connecticut building codes, local building codes, as well as cybersecurity frameworks is essential. The utilities would emphasize that the importance of adhering to these standards to ensure the safety and reliability of the batteries. We would also consider, and I think it was one of the other comments that were submitted, to allow other storage technologies that apply to the front of the meter program to be agnostic. So to go beyond what we would see, what we would consider is your standard lithium ion type of technology, as long as it meets all the safety standards and other standards that we've mentioned above. We can go to the next slide. So program administration, our recommendation is that we have the UDCs co-administer the program to ensure grid reliability and streamline the enrollment process. We feel that we have existing resources that can be leveraged for both marketing, performance incentive payment administration, that would help maximize the benefits, minimize the cost, and avoid some of the unnecessary complexity and efficiencies that we encountered initially with the ESS program. And we'll get into a later slide, but obviously it's worth stating that any program administrative expenses, we will need to have a mechanism for cost recovery along with that. And you can go to the next slide. So finally, program benefits and some new objectives. So the front of the meter storage program should provide positive net present value to ratepayers. It should focus on grid scale benefits and large scale deployment challenges. Potential objectives would include enhancing grid modernization, supporting regional energy security, facilitating market participation and innovation, promoting public-private partnerships, and ensuring equitable access and benefits. The focus would be on critical infrastructure and large-scale resilience, as I mentioned earlier, rather than individual or small community benefit. Again, the sole purpose, I think, of these larger projects is going to be to participate in the wholesale markets. So the resilience and, the overall ratepayer benefit is going to be a much larger net is going to be cast for that. It's also important to note that the overall benefits of the program are going to be dependent on the constructs, tying back to what Jennifer Key mentioned earlier in the presentation. You have the wholesale market construct, which increases the supply of the capacity, while a state jurisdictional construct would reduce the overall demand. Any objectives we would implement would need to be properly aligned with set program metrics. And the EDCs will certainly opine further on these data metrics in response to the latest set in request for comments like we got on March 27th regarding the data metrics. And you can go to the next slide, please. And I believe this is the last one. Yes. So just going back into cost recovery a little bit, we do need to establish a cost recovery mechanism before making any final decisions to ensure the timely recovery of all costs associated with the front of the meter storage program's development and administration. Both EDCs have already hired outside consultants to help answer interrogatories we received from the authority to date. We suggest, obviously, that we would keep track of the reasonable costs involved in developing the front of the meter storage program and reporting these costs in the next year's revenue adjustment mechanism. This should be done, right, with the understanding that the FTM storage program is considered an offset of the original docket 171203 RE03 and also in the ASS Year 2 final decision, which was docket 220805. So in conclusion, we do appreciate everyone's the opportunity to share comments in the recommendations for front of the meter storage program in the state of Connecticut. And we feel that with careful planning and consideration of the key issues, we believe we can create a program that delivers significant benefits to all of our ratepayers and grid resiliency. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the team's presentation, and I'm going to get right into questions from our staff as I know they have a number of them. And I'll turn first to Christopher Arpin, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the EDCs for their presentation and time today. Mr. Bumpin, could you please turn to slide 4? So I have a number of questions on the FERC jurisdictional topic. So my first question, probably best suited for Attorney Key. If distribution connected FTM storage were compensated for local grid services such as peak shaving or voltage support and not for resale in the wholesale markets, how can it still be considered a sale for resale under FERC order number 841?
I think that was my point, is that it can't, and that means that the storage device needs to be charged at under a retail rate. That it would then not participate in the wholesale market at all. If it's going to provide and sell those services, it would be charged at a retail rate. The delivery would be at a retail transmission and distribution rate, and it wouldn't be able to sell it wouldn't be able to sell at wholesale because as I discussed on the other slide, the notion of trying to commingle, we're bringing some power in from the ISO New England and some power in at retail. It's just so difficult. So that the point of the slide was, yes, FERC jurisdiction would not be involved in that case. But obviously there, just to be clear, there wouldn't be market participation. There'd be participation in selling products that are not FERC jurisdictional.
So I appreciate that response, but just to clarify, so could an FTM storage resource get power from wholesale markets, and then the EDCs could then potentially provide compensation for retail grid services? Is that a construct that would apply under FERC jurisdiction? Why or why not?
No, because Order 841 made clear that the right to purchase for the storage device to purchase wholesale energy, it has to be storing it for the purpose of reselling it at wholesale. So the quote, the sale of energy from the grid that is used to charge electric storage resources for later resale into the energy or ancillary services markets constitutes a sale for resale to interstate commerce. What they're saying is if ISO New England sells energy to the storage device, it has to be used for later resale in the energy or ancillary services market. So if it's not going to be used for sale back into the wholesale market, the purchase has to be at retail.
Okay, thank you for that response. And so that's required by order number 841, correct?
Yeah, and I'd say it's not only required by order 841. It's the notion of, the storage device is, taking energy off the grid, and is that energy, what's the purpose of that energy? Is that sale at wholesale or retail under the Federal Power Act? And what FERC has said, that sale can only be considered at wholesale and interstate commerce if that energy is later going to be used to be resold at wholesale and interstate commerce. So it's really the Federal Power Act as well that's just coming into play, that you have to define energy that is being, well, you might not say consumed, but taken off the grid by a load, and obviously the storage device is a form of load. How is it later going to be? FERC has said to determine whether you can purchase at wholesale is based on how you're going to use that energy later. When you think about it, the easy way is FERC would never let someone buy power at wholesale, and let's just say you're in a retail choice state, and just resell it at retail, because you could completely arbitrage and play games that way.
Thank you for that response. So now another question on a slightly different topic. So what technical requirements must distribution connected FTM storage meet to qualify for capacity market participation under FERC order number 841? And how might these requirements affect the system's performance and economic viability?
And it really, 841 doesn't truly come into play. I mean, storage is treated like any other generation as far as FERC regulation is concerned. Need a market-based rate tariff. You need to abide by FERC regulations on keeping your market-based rate tariff. And, you know, which includes reporting requirements to FERC. Obviously, to participate in any particular ISO, you need to sign up with that ISO and abide by all their requirements to participate in the market. Obviously, the ISO New England would have, you know, metering and its own requirements on telemetry and all that sort of stuff. So just, you know, effectively what any other generator, you know, participating in the market has to do. And, you know, unless they're, I mean, obviously there's generators that don't have to do everything because there's various exemptions from the Federal Power Act. You know, for example, municipal-owned generation doesn't have to jump through any of those hoops, but, you know, if it's privately owned storage or generation, you know, those are the basics.
Okay, thank you for that response, Attorney Key. So now another question, staying on this slide. How does FERC's jurisdictional limitation impact the financial viability of distribution-connected FTM storage projects, particularly in terms of benefits to consumers and EDCs? Additionally, are there ways to overcome these limitations to enhance the value proposition of such systems to Connecticut ratepayers?
Well, I think that the main way it affects it is that, you know, if they're going to participate in the wholesale market, then, you know, the notion that they're at the same time, you know, would be providing value by, it's a peak shaving load just isn't accurate. What they're doing is increasing supply in the wholesale market and, you know, theoretically lowering wholesale prices. And that's a benefit. But, you know, I think one of the problems we were seeing in some of the write-ups is it was sort of assumed that they were going to both participate in the wholesale market and provide benefits by reducing demand. And it's a sort of one or the other. They're either selling into the wholesale market or they're reducing demand on the notion that, you know, that the load of the EDCs is going to be met by the energy that they've stored without being sold either to the EDC. You know, it's just the EDCs are going to dispatch them. The energy is going to be effectively what we would call an unregistered generator asset under the ISO New England construct, because they just don't use the term storage that often. But, you know, but still you could have, you know, you certainly could have, you know, a program and benefits where, you know, the distributed storage gets most of its revenues. And again, this was on the slides from the working group where it was assumed the storage device would participate in the wholesale market and earn revenues there. And I don't think, you know, and there would be an incentive payment. I'm just not sure. I'm not positive personally whether the analysis of the benefits of that took into the account, well, they're not then shaving the load of the utility, they're just increasing supply in the market.
To follow up on that, could the storage resource potentially participate in both demand response and wholesale markets if those were at different times? As in, like if the EDC called an active dispatch event at one time, and then they later on participate in wholesale markets at a different time?
It would be extremely difficult because of the notion of what power, how did they obtain the power? that's being stored, and you can't really segregate it unless you literally had some kind of setup where you had two different, let's say at a battery site, you had one set of batteries that was going to pay the retail price and one set of batteries that was going to pay the wholesale price and use the WDAT, because you can't commingle the power and do the accounting to tell the difference between the two.
Okay, thank you for that response. Now moving on to a slightly different topic, keeping on FERC jurisdiction. Are there anticipated changes in federal regulations that could affect how distribution-connected FTM storage interacts with jurisdictional requirements? How might these changes influence the feasibility of Connecticut FTM storage projects?
Nothing in particular that I know of. There certainly, I don't know of any rulemakings in play, pending rulemakings or indications from FERC of changes. And I think part of that is because, distributed front of the meter storage is participating in markets in different parts of the country, some with no incentives at all. California, as far as I know, it has, there's targets for storage, but I think because of the economics of California and the price differentials, that distributed storage is economic and is being installed. So, and obviously I know that New York has a bulk storage program with an incentive where so it's a little bit different. It's the storage devices are participating in the market, but they're completely dispatched by the EDCs, who have a FERC jurisdictional contract to dispatch them, and they all have market-based rates and whatnot. I think that program's, if I remember, that program's for 5 megawatt and larger, or about that. But yeah, and I think certainly in other parts of the country as well, there's there's certainly front of the meter storage that's economic without any incentives at all, but it and is being installed.
Is it the EDC's position that storage is not economical without incentives in Connecticut due to the differences in price differentials?
Well, I'd say this is, I'm not going to really speak for the EDCs, but in the course of this proceeding, in working group slides that are now almost 2 years old, it was very clear that there was a gap between, I'll say not insignificant, a somewhat significant gap between what a front of the meter distributed storage device likely would take in from the market versus what it would need to earn. I think they were using a 12% return. And, that's not the EDC's analysis. I think they contributed to that analysis, but that was the outside consultants. I mean, we wouldn't be talking about incentives at all if it was economic. And like I said, I'm aware, just as a FERC lawyer, that there certainly are front of the meter storage that is not receiving. I mean, obviously they might be receiving investment tax credits, which for the moment, at least, we're not sure. And when you said the question, is there anything pending that might happen? I think the biggest risk, obviously, is the administration ending the investment tax credit for storage, which would make the incentive so huge that I'm not sure I'm not going to pine again for Eversource or Avangrid, but taking away those incentive tax credits for storage, which is a possibility, would greatly change the economics.
Thank you for that response, Attorney Key. To follow up on something you said a moment ago about New York's program, it sounded like the EDCs there might have gotten around the FERC jurisdictional problem by negotiating directly with FERC and having like a separate contract, if I understand that correctly.
No, from what I understand, and this is and this is based on central, I just was looking at a Central Hudson and Gas agreement, which clearly was a FERC jurisdictional agreement. What the agreement says is it's a dispatch it's an agreement where the storage device gives Central Hudson complete and total dispatch control and really operational control over the front of the meter resource. But one of the first requirements of the contract is the front of the meter storage device has to have market-based rate tariff. My understanding would be that the front of the device would get the market revenues. It's just that the dispatch and control of the unit would be by Central Hudson and Gas, but the contract between Central Hudson and Gas and the storage resource was drafted clearly as if that contract itself was FERC jurisdictional, but it was probably under a it probably would be under Central Hudson's market-based rate tariff, which, there's light-handed regulation, but it's, so FERC is definitely still involved in the storage devices, definitively have to, have market-based rates to get that dispatch contract, and they enter into a separate contract to get the incentive payment from NYSERDA, which my vague understanding of how NYSERDA works is there's billions of dollars that entity has access to provide incentives to all sorts of different programs in New York.
Okay,
So
thank you
that there's two contracts, one for the incentive. I think they use an RFP to bid how much of an incentive they want. They get that incentive from the state, and then they get their market-based rates, enter into a contract for dispatch, to sell the dispatch, where the utility is taking control of the storage device.
Thank you for that clarification and response. So now another question here, staying on FERC jurisdictional topic. If an FTM program were structured around distribution level demand response style payments untethered to wholesale market participation, would FERC's jurisdiction still apply?
Yeah, if it's going to be a demand response, you don't need to worry about FERC jurisdiction and the tethering, because what's going to happen is, my understanding is the utility would have dispatch control. They'd say to dispatch, and effectively the energy being discharged would be used, would just flow to EDC load anyway and reduce the amount of load, and also, capacity and ancillary services and transmission that the EDC would need to buy from the ISO New England. At least that's my understanding of what would be going on. And of course, the storage device, in effect, would have to have its full cost covered by the EDC, because it doesn't have anything to sell. It has nothing to sell to any third party. All the money it would be receiving would be from the EDC.
Thank you for that response. So to clarify, under that construct, the storage would get the power under retail rates instead of the wholesale distribution access tariff?
Well, it would get the power. It would buy the power either under a bundled retail rate, including transmission, distribution, and energy, or if it wanted to choose there is choice in Connecticut. It could choose to get its energy and capacity, I suppose, from a third party, and the transmission and distribution would be from the EDC.
Okay, thank you for that response. Now I'd like to move to slide 5, please, Mr. Bumpin. So my question here, and I know you touched on this a little before, but how does FERC ensure that DERs aren't compensated for the same service twice if hypothetically they were participating in both FERC jurisdictional and state jurisdictional programs? Is there a clear standardized method for tracking services to avoid overlap?
In order to basically, and this is for resources in aggregations, they expect either the EDC or the state authority to root out if someone's trying to sell like energy or capacity twice. Using the basic example of net metering is if an entity was enrolled in the state net metering program, obviously it's always being compensated for any energy or capacity it's producing, even if it's, through an offset. And thus, when that retail customer has excess energy, they can't sell it to the wholesale market and at the same time have it count so they get credit, at night for the same energy that they've already, sold to the wholesale market. So, but FERC does expect that the EDCs, have the incentive, and the state should have the incentive too, obviously, because you don't want people compensated twice for the same service. So they leave that to the EDC, and when they look at the registration of the aggregation, they say, hey, they can't do this because they're already being paid for, they can't be paid for this service because they're already providing this service under a state program.
Okay, thank you for that response. To follow up on our conversation from earlier, what logistical and operational challenges might an FTM storage resource face if it tries to segregate purchased wholesale energy used for retail demand response services?
I mean, and this is just, an opinion is, I would think it would need, multiple, multiple units of batteries connected separately, and one metered at retail and one metered at wholesale. And it would, it would be effectively it would be two separate load assets. And one would be a load asset that's just a load asset of the EDC, and the other would be registered separately with the ISO New England as a load asset, and it would interact with the ISO New England as to the wholesale purchases. And, but I would definitely see there would probably have to be two interconnections, and, different, there'd be two different load assets, but one would be an EDC load asset and one would be the storage devices load asset. And when it would discharge, it would, I mean, you could be on the same piece of property, you just might have two interconnections, two sets of meters. And if you wanted to resell it wholesale, you'd use the energy stored from this set of batteries. And if you wanted to provide demand response, you'd use energy from the other set of batteries.
Okay, thank you for that response. I would like to move to slide 7, please. Could the EDCs please explain why Pura cannot direct the EDCs to compensate FTM storage for providing distribution level local grid services, provided the incentives are tied to retail level peak load reduction and do not require participation in wholesale markets? And I think you might have answered this earlier, but just to clarify.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, could the EDCs please clarify why Pura cannot direct the EDCs to compensate FTM storage for providing distribution level local grid services, provided the incentives are tied to retail level peak load reduction and do not require participation in wholesale markets?
That's not what I said. The sort of the pure Connecticut, Pura only model is fine. What's not fine, what's not necessarily fine is the notion of a different way to sort of to use the storage for peak shaving would be for the storage devices to actually sell the energy ancillary services and capacity to the EDCs as a sale, where they would take title to that, to those products. And then they would use those products to reduce their load. So that's a different than the notion of there being no sale. Of the sale being characterized as demand response, being characterized as a wholesale sale. If it's characterized as a wholesale sale, then that's where Pura lacks the authority. If there's a sale from the storage to the EDCs.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Attorney Key. Now I'd like to turn to slide 9, please. So my question here, the 240808 decision applies to the non-wire solutions program. Can the EDCs please explain for the record in this proceeding why FTM storage must be EDC owned to provide distribution and resiliency benefits?
Sure. So the main barrier is the fact that if the EDC is as responsible for safe and reliable service, we need to be able to depend on an asset as much a third-party owned asset as much as we can an EDC owned asset. And the barrier to that is some limitations that we have today. We would need complete dispatch authority, so we would need visibility and control of the facility. We would need kind of contractual. So what happens if a contractual arrangement to ensure that, let's say the third party asset is down for maintenance, or somehow they've decided to participate in some other program and they aren't available when we need them, right? We can't count on them to be available. What happens then? So there's the need for agreements and kind of the consequence of not being available when needed. And then probably the biggest barrier is we would absolutely need real-time visibility and control based on the as operated model of the distribution system. So, I think there's some more questions and we'll probably get into it. Distributed Energy Resource Management System, or DERMS. There's two flavors of DERMS. There's one that can dispatch behind the meter resources or potentially front of the meter, but is not informed by real-time system conditions. That we call that an aggregate. For behind the meter, we call it an aggregator or an edge DERMS, right? A grid DERMS is something that connects to a real-time model of the system. So I know right now that I have a concern about an overload at the tunnel substation, and I need to, right now I know what's going on in the power flow on the system. I know what resources are available. I can see them respond in real time. All of that, similar to an asset that exists today, all of those capabilities need to exist, and we do not have them.
Okay, thank you for that response, Ms. Dilling. In the interest of time, I'm going to hold off on my follow-ups on that question. I just have one more question before I turn it over to other authority staff. Could we please turn to slide 18, please? My question here, could the EDCs please explain which departments, roles, or areas of expertise must be provided in-house rather than by a third party for an FTM program to be successful?
So I would look kind of the resource structure to be the same as what we do for energy storage solutions. So if you think about that, for energy storage solutions, we require a third party PM&V consultant to help do the data metrics for that program. We leverage a third party for the payment administration of that program. And for marketing, we have existing contracts in place with entities as well as our DERMS contracts that are existing. We would leverage resources like those, although to your point, those are not external. We would leverage those relationships in order to support a front of the meter program. Internally, we would definitely need a program manager or program administrator to help run the program and coordinate all those resources at the start.
Thank you for that response. And I thank the
welcome.
EDCs for their presentation and time today. So I turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Attorney Riley, questions?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to the panel for your responses and presentation so far this morning. I think my questions are largely going to focus on Attorney Key's part of the presentation, particularly slide 4. And I think I'm just going to keep my questions to helping to aid or untangle perhaps some definitions in Order 841. So I noticed in 841, the FERC seemed to be articulating a pretty comprehensive definition of electric storage resources. And then it also mentions demand response resources. For our purposes, does that distinction mean anything? And what are those distinctions? And also, is demand resources defined elsewhere in a subsequent FERC order?
Well, certainly there's several key FERC orders on demand response. Order 719 is the main order. I think there's one other whose number is escaping me at the moment. But I think, the reason I mentioned it on the slide is the fact that, FERC explaining that demand response, which is not a FERC jurisdictional product, although it's often priced and sold through FERC jurisdictional markets, but the sale itself of that product or the product is not FERC jurisdictional, even in a wholesale market, is that, the reason I brought up the issue is that by FERC saying that, demand response doesn't involve a sale of energy at wholesale and interstate commerce, that ties back to the issue of what energy can be used, what energy can be purchased, stored, and then used as demand response, because demand response is not a resale of the energy, then the energy used for demand response and from a storage device would have to be retail energy. But there's, many FERC decisions discussing demand response and also the various tariff, the ISO tariff has certainly a definition in various demand response programs that it runs. So, I think you could find a lot of definitions of demand response. Any lowering demand is the best. I don't think I have one off the top of my head, but FERC considers it something that lowers the demand.
Okay, understood. Thank you for your response. And I think similarly, I think I focused on similar language in reviewing the language you had quoted earlier about the sale of electric energy from the grid used to charge electric storage resources for later resale into the energy or ancillary service markets constitutes a sale for resale. I believe that we're on the same page there with the quoted language. Is there an expansive definition of what constitutes a resale into those markets?
A sale for resale just means that the entity you're selling to isn't consuming the energy. It's that's it. It's that, you're selling it to an entity that's not consuming it. That's, the EDCs, when EDCs purchase energy, they resell it to their retail customers. If an energy, certified retail supplier in Connecticut, it purchases energy and resells it to its retail customers. you have community aggregation, they, they resell it. So, but sale for resale just means it's being sold to someone who isn't going to consume it itself.
Okay, understood. Thank you. And then finally, I was just going to ask, I know you mentioned the New York program and perhaps California, and this is probably for yourself or any of the panelists. So are there any other state like DPUCs that have implemented a front of the meter program that you think would serve as a model as what the authority is trying to accomplish in this proceeding?
What I know of is there is a number of states that have procurement targets for storage, but New York is one of the only programs with an incentive that I know of, but I just haven't really, that's just all I know off the top of my head. I mean, I know Michigan has, I think Texas and Michigan have, targets. I think Texas already met its, Texas has a tremendous amount of storage. But that's because it has a tremendous amount of renewables. And the same for California. I think that the states that have tremendous amounts of renewables have added, but mostly, as far as I know, without paying them incentives, tremendous amounts of storage, because the utilities need the storage and they'll pay a price for it that, they'll voluntarily pay a price that makes it economic. But I think Rod may have some insight, but, on that there may be far more severe price differentials because of the amount of renewables in states like Texas and California is one of the reasons that you have the price differentials that make it economic. And also the need for the ancillary services like from storage that makes it economic. Rob, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Not really. I honestly haven't taken much of an in-depth look at other jurisdictions and what those pricing models look like at this point.
And I'd say one other thing. Obviously, there's a lot of states that take the route of, including, of course, your neighbor to the north in Massachusetts, of pairing storage with renewables, which is a whole different ballgame where the storage can't charge from the grid. The storage can only charge from the renewable. That means the storage, can be a PURPA, can be a qualifying facility under PURPA, and you have a whole different scenario there in a situation where you have storage paired with a renewable and not charging from the grid. And there's, I'd say in California, as far as the distributed storage, a good amount of it would be paired, and it's, especially the residential, but and the behind the meter. But even on the front of the meter, you would see front of the meter paired with storage, so it doesn't have to charge from the grid. And if it's under 20 megawatts, then you don't get the FERC regulation coming into play. So there's definite advantage to pairing renewable and not charging from the grid to avoid FERC regulation. You don't have to deal with that hassle. You don't have to sell under PURPA, but by being a QF, you avoid the hassle of FERC, of most FERC regulation. Not all FERC regulation, but some for rate regulation, having to get the market-based rate tariff.
Thank you very much for your insights this morning, Attorney Kay. And I'm, for the sake of time, I'm going to turn the rest of my time over to other authority staff.
Thank you. And last but not least, we'll take questions from authority staff Molly Charles. And we're running a bit over. So after Ms. Charles' questions, we're going to transition to the Green Banks presentation. So Ms. Charles, please.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks again to the panel for the presentation today. I just have a couple more questions here. If we could turn to slide 16. So could the EDCs please elaborate on the difference between the cost-based and market-based methodologies for setting a first-year price cap in terms of what information is considered in setting those price caps and what the ultimate value might be.
I'm sorry, my audio cut out for a minute. Apologies.
Yeah, sorry, I can repeat the question.
Sure,
I was
thank
wondering
you.
if you could just elaborate on the difference between the cost-based and the market-based methodologies for setting a price cap.
So the cost base, essentially, we would set that price cap to cover any ownership costs that the developers would incur by owning that asset. So it's more kind of takes the incentive out of the picture a little bit, and that cost is set at you know, enough at a bar so that they can cover the ownership costs. For market-based, you know, we look at the revenue side. So how much revenue are they going to be bringing in by selling the energy from that asset into the wholesale markets? That's really the key differences.
Okay, thank you for that. And would the EDCs have a recommendation on which would be more appropriate?
We haven't really taken a deeper look in this, and I believe this is addressed a little bit further in the latest request for written comments. So I think in those we would be able to opine further on that.
Okay, thank you for that response.
You're welcome.
And then just one question on slide 19. Thank you. Yeah, could the EDCs just explain a little bit more of the rationale behind each of the new suggested program objectives?
So I think the new program objectives are aligned more with what you would see for a larger scale storage project, which we are anticipating we'll see with the front of the meter storage program, and also for, again, that participation in the wholesale market as opposed to a more local market.
Thank you. And one additional follow-up question on that. Would the EDC see any of these objectives as being in conflict with one another? And if so, how would you suggest resolving any conflicts?
I don't know that they would be in conflict with one another. I think because ultimately these are going to have to roll up, I think, as I mentioned earlier, into measurable data and metrics that we can report back in. So I think we'll see a combination and maybe modification of some of the program benefits and objectives we have from the ESS program. But again, they're going to have to be positioned so that they are more applicable with a wholesale, a larger wholesale type market, and get away from what we're looking at more of the local resiliency benefits that we're strictly focused on within the ESS program. I think it's very safe to say that developers coming in with these larger storage projects, you know, the key goal and initiative is for them to participate, and the key drivers for them to participate in wholesale markets. You know, I think ultimately there will be ratepayer benefit at the local level, but it's really difficult to measure what that is going to look like. And, you know, just going back to, you know, kind of adding in here, you know, right now with the ESS program, we call events based on the forecasted ISO peaks. And the thought would be that a developer, when they want to participate in the wholesale market, they're going to want to make those sales at the same time as those peaks. So there's a lot of intermixing going on with what those plans are going to look like and how they tie back to these objectives. You know, that was kind of a long-winded response, but there's a lot of moving parts to these specific.
Yeah, I appreciate the responses. And
You're
that's
welcome.
my questions for now, so I'll turn it back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, as I mentioned, we're going to transition to the Connecticut Green Bank now. So I want to thank all of the panelists from the electric distribution companies for your presentation, for answering our questions today. Thank you. Okay, if we can invite to the virtual stage the team from the Connecticut Green Bank, please. And same opening question to you all, if you would like to control your slides or if you'd like Mr. Bumpin to pull them up.
I think if it's possible, Mr. Bumpin, that'd be great. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'll kick us off. Thank you. Good morning, Chair Gillette and Pura staff. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Pine, and I'm an Associate Director on the Incentives Program team at the Connecticut Green Bank. Joining me today are several Green Bank employees, including Sergio Carrillo, Managing Director of Incentive Programs, who you will hear from in a few minutes, Ed Kranich, Senior Manager, Brendan Smith, Manager, and James DeSantos, Director of Legislative and Regulatory Affairs. Also joining us today is Stefan Wollenberg from Sustainable Energy Advantage, and is available for questions as SEA worked on some of the original run-of-the-meter working group proposals. Next slide, please. Thank you. The Green Bank appreciates the opportunity to present today, and I just wanted to provide a quick overview of what we'll be covering. First, we will walk through our program's megawatt cap recommendation and then the competitive procurement design, and wrap up with questions. Next slide, please. All right, let's begin. Let's begin with the megawatt cap and procurement design. Currently, there is public policy in the state that helps us recommend a capacity cap for a front-of-the-meter program, as Rob touched upon in the earlier presentation. First on this slide is the enactment of Public Act 2153, which established the statewide target of 1,000 megawatts of energy storage by 2030. Of the 1,000 megawatts, 580 megawatts is already allocated to the behind-the-meter storage program that Jen touched upon before, and through this is through Docket 171203 RE03. Also under the same target, DEEP awarded 200 megawatts of front-of-the-meter capacity through its initial competitive procurement. In combination, these account for about 780 megawatts, leaving potentially about 220 megawatts for future front-of-the-meter efforts, unless the statute is revised. That initial target for the program, our recommendation is that the initial target for the program be set at 220 megawatts of capacity for deployment. Next slide, please. All right, with respect to using the competitive procurement design, Green Bank recommends using a declining block structure, potentially similar to what's been successful in the administration of the Residential Solar Investment Program, RSIP, and more recently, the Energy Storage Solutions Program. This approach offers revenue predictability for developers, which is important when securing project financing. It encourages early participation and creates a more natural market progression. If this approach is adopted, Green Bank's recommendation is to consider the adoption of additional project maturity requirements. Now going to hand it over to Sergio for the next couple of slides, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sergio Carrillo. I'm Managing Director of Incentive Programs with the Green Bank. So one challenge that we're facing in the Energy Storage Solutions Program has been attrition rates. Some projects will have very long interconnection delays, or have had longer than we ever anticipated. And some projects will have to cancel entirely due to the uncertainty that this implies. To potentially reduce these, adding maturity requirements may be beneficial and will improve the chances of these projects coming to fruition. Some of these requirements may include proof of Connecticut Siting Council review, an interconnection service agreement with the ISO New England, or any other documentation showing project readiness that may indicate that the developer has committed significant financial resources and that they will continue to pursue the projects. Another item worth exploring may be project size caps. Project size caps may improve the deployment speed as the larger projects, as I mentioned, may have struggle and sit in the interconnection queue for months, if not years. As Jennifer Ronion mentioned in the EDC's presentation, of the 160 megawatts of CNI projects that have been approved in ESS, less than 1 megawatt are online. That is less than 0.5% of the approved capacity. It happens that these 4 projects are less than 250 kW in capacity. So this is a clear indication that limiting the size of the projects will help speed or the speed to market of these projects. I'm not saying 250, but definitely something of a smaller size. We know that front-of-the-meter projects may tend to be much larger than what we are experiencing in ESS. So imposing some sort of cap may be recommended. Also, favoring a first ready, first served approach will also accelerate project development rather than accepting projects that, as I mentioned, may sit in the interconnection queue for months, if not years. And next slide, please. All right, so I wanted to spend a couple minutes highlighting key differences between behind the meter and front of the meter storage programs that affect the program design and administration, and suggest that the Green Bank may not be suited to co-administer a program like this. Green Bank's strength has been the ability to leverage public funds to attract private capital and finance the deployment of clean energy. But we believe the size of these projects, as I mentioned, will hinder our ability to continue to play this role. Not to mention the fact that developers of front-of-the-meter projects may have secured private capital, and we don't want to be in that situation competing with private capital. From a customer's perspective, there are potentially fewer projects, right? These are much larger projects, fewer customers. They're typically larger and fewer developers and asset owners rather than individual homeowners or business owners. Most Green Bank incentive programs will work with contractors, multiple contractors, dozens of contractors, thousands of customers and business owners. This will not be the case in a front-of-the-meter program. The need for contractor or technology vetting is likely reduced, as these projects will also likely need to go through the interconnection queue, and there may only be a handful of developers that have projects that could be submitted on a first ready and first served basis. Application volume will be significantly lower than what we're used to manage, and this will obviously depend on the overall program goal. But these front-of-the-meter projects are individual projects, likely much, much larger, as I mentioned, and more complex. As I mentioned, I want to say it again, attrition rates are high in ESS. And this is particularly true for some of the larger projects. These are some differences that should be considered when designing an FTM program structure and selecting a program administrator. Next slide, please. Yes, and two final points that I wanted to emphasize. One relates to increasing the total target. So to compensate for the inevitable project attrition, we believe there should be consideration around increasing the overall energy storage goal beyond the 1,000 megawatts established by Public Act 2153. And it's also important to mention that to avoid market ambiguity and uncertainty, similar to what the market experience with connected solutions and when ESS launched, that both coexisted for a couple of years. Eventually, DEEP and the EDCs stopped accepting new applications in the connected solutions projects, and ESS is now the only battery storage program. But for a couple years, there was a lot of confusion in the market that we thought slowed down adoption and applications. It would be helpful to clearly differentiate this program from other programs, that is ESS, to avoid, as I mentioned, overlapping and having competing initiatives that could confuse or slow market growth. It would be great to see the program complementing existing policies while ensuring Connecticut meets its long-term storage and resilience goals. Next slide. And yes, I think that concludes our presentation. Thanks, Pura, for the opportunity. And we look forward to hearing other presentations.
Thank you both so much. We're going to turn to questions first from the authority staff, and we'll start with Christopher Arpin, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the Connecticut Green Bank for their time and presentation today. Mr. Bumpin, could you please turn to slide 5? So my question here, why does the Green Bank recommend a declining block structure over a competitive procurement approach for an FTM storage program, given that a competitive procurement approach has been successfully used in the NRES and SCEF programs?
I think the deciding factor was the certainty of revenues. As Sarah mentioned, just the predictability of revenue streams to developers. I think it's very important for a program to be successful.
Okay, thank you for that response, Mr. Carrillo. Now I'd like to turn to slide 6, please. So my question here, what project size cap would the Connecticut Green Bank suggest for an FTM storage program and why?
Yeah, I'll start and you can jump in if you, I don't think we necessarily have a recommendation on the cap. I think we just have a general understanding that some of the smaller sized systems are potentially getting through the interconnection process a little bit faster than some of the ones that are bigger. Sergio, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yes, I think from what we've heard from developers, we understand that the sweet spot for front of the meter program project is between 5 and 20 megawatts. And based on the experience in ESS, we're sure that those projects will experience long interconnection timelines.
Thank you for that response. Now I would like to turn to slide 8, please. My question here, if the total program target were increased beyond 220 megawatts to account for project attrition, what attrition rate would the Green Bank recommend and why?
Yeah, that is it's a little complicated, but Mr. Arpin, I can tell you the attrition rate that ESS is experiencing in tranche 1 of the first 50 megawatts of projects that we approved, more than 40% of the capacity has been canceled for different reasons. I don't want to say is the interconnection queue the only factor. There are other factors, but the attrition rate for these projects it's alarming. So in tranche 2, we approved 113 megawatts. We still haven't seen any cancellations, but I think it's just a matter of time. I think we still don't have enough data to to suggest what that rate could be.
Thank you for that response, Mr. Carrillo. And on my final question,
Mr. Arpin, I'm sorry. I just wanted to add that we can, if the authority is interested, we could file a report on attrition rates so as to keep them updated of what's going on in ESS.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, yes, for consideration of this program as well. So now my final question, staying on this slide, how does the Green Bank propose structuring an FTM storage program to avoid overlap or confusion with other competing programs, such as those run by the
A good question. I think Deep had some feedback and comments in their written comments, and I think they were also in favor of making sure that programs are different enough that it's not causing confusion, and so it could be done in a few different ways, but there might be other folks that have other opinions on what that might look like.
Yes, and I also think the part of the thinking there was that is to not make a front of the meter program part of ESS. Don't roll it under ESS. Let's keep it clear. ESS is behind the meter. There's also that is front of the meter. Keep them separate. That will avoid any confusions.
You follow up on that, or are there specific ways that the Green Bank would recommend structuring the program to avoid this confusion, like in terms of communication or marketing or so forth?
Mr. Arpin, I can't think of anything right now, but we can follow up. We can, I can take it back to the team and file something at a later time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Carrillo. And those are all my questions for the Green Bank. So again, I thank the Green Bank for their time and presentation today, and I turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'll check with the other team members. Attorney Riley.
Nothing from me, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Charles.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks to the Green Bank for the presentation. If we could turn to slide 5, please. So would the Green Bank also support including maturity requirements in a competitive procurement design if that program design was adopted?
Ms. Charles, I'm sorry, would you mind repeating the question?
Sure. I was just wondering if a potential competitive procurement program design was adopted, would the Green Bank also support including maturity requirements in that case?
I think it's definitely worth looking into. I'm sure some of the developers in their later presentations are probably going to cover some other potential ideas. But just in ESS, and I think Rob or Jen potentially touched upon this earlier, is that in an ESS, we at least collect the interconnection application up front. And that's before approving the incentive reservation letter. So working with program administrators and developers to understand what maturity requirements would be most applicable, I think would be beneficial.
Yeah, thanks for that. Just to follow up on the maturity requirements, does the Green Bank have a sense of how much maturity requirements would improve project timelines and deployment schedules compared to what's been seen with C&I ESS projects so far?
I don't think we would have an exact number, but we could certainly take that back and see if there's anything that we could follow up with, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. Thank you. And if we could turn to the next slide, please. So So would the Green Bank support separate procurement categories for front of the meter storage program? For example, differentiating by size category or long duration versus short duration storage resources?
If I can jump in on that one real quick, Sergio, if you're okay with that.
Stefan, please. Yes, thank you.
I would generally suggest that if you're going to differentiate based on, and project configuration, whatever it is, you should have a very clear hypothesis about differential value that's provided, right? So I would suggest, right, that simply saying that you want to have 250 kW to 1 megawatt projects and 1 megawatt to 5 megawatt projects compensated differently. You should be able to provide some evidence that they provide different value. So that as a sort of a framework to consider, I would suggest that that's one that you might apply here, right? Again, ensuring that there's actually different value and preferably greater value if you're going to provide greater incentives.
Thanks for that response. And just one more question on the next slide, on slide 7. What approach would the Green Bank recommend for contractor vetting, if anything?
I want to say that from our conversations with developers, there wouldn't be any need to do that in ESS. And what we did with RCIP, we would vet and we provide a pool of contractors that are available for any interested party to participate in the program. However, in front of the meter, due to the size of these projects and the complexity, it's very likely that the developer will bring their own contractors, their own capital providers, etc. So we don't foresee these being part of the program.
Okay, I appreciate those responses, and thanks again for your time this morning. I'll turn it back to you, Chairman.
Thank you. I believe we are slightly over time. So I think to keep us moving here, I'm going to thank the Green Bank team for your presentation, for answering our questions, and we will move on to our next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, can we welcome to the virtual stage the team from TriTech, Kensley and Triad.
Yep. Yeah, thank you. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. So my name is Paul Michaud. I'm the managing member of Michaud Law Group. Our law firm specializes in, we represent international and national investors in energy, mostly from North America, South America, and Europe. And our clients have been and continue to be interested in investing in Connecticut. So we're speaking on their behalf. We also represent a lot of other developers here. So again, we already submitted comments, and I'm not going to repeat them now. They're in the record. But I did want to touch upon one area that we really think is important. That's been kind of coming clear through our work at the Siting Council, is that and we believe this would be a really big barrier to the front of the meter program. And so the elephant in the room that we think is going to be a big barrier to the entire program is the perception by the public in regard to public safety and fire, thermal runaway. We think we're seeing it as a really, really large problem that could actually hinder this any potential program. And that's why I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about that here today. So Mr. Bumpkin, can you put up my slide? I'm not going to talk to it directly, but I just want to have it up front, if that's possible. Thank you. And again, I'm not going to read this. People can read it when they have time. But in Connecticut, there is a perceived or in real fear of public safety in regard to battery storage. And in our experiences, even on small projects, we've had pushback on public safety issues. And now that we are developing a project up to 500 megawatts in Connecticut, and so it's just going to be amplified, the public safety issues. And we've already been working on that through the Siting Council and other entities. What we recommend to help alleviate this is strict standards for technical safety. What we're worried about is if we follow, and we were good with following the NRES and SAM programs and the competitive procurement process, but what happens there is those programs, and it's a good thing, but the programs are basically a race to the bottom, where the projects became more and more competitive and the pricing came lower and lower and lower. And that is really great for ratepayers. And it worked really well, like, for example, with the solar. What we're concerned and what might happen on the battery side is that if we don't have really strict standards in place, that this competitive downward pressure on bid pricing is going to cause projects that may be less than meet the strict safety standards to actually, be selected at the expense of maybe projects that do purchase their batteries or their energy in batteries from manufacturers who actually use the highest standards. They really comply with all the UL standards, 9540 and 9540A, where they actually do the testing. And if you cut corners there, you may be able to bid a project lower and win, but it may not, what we really want is maybe to balance that with projects that actually do meet the best standards, but they may be a little more expensive in order to meet those standards. So there's kind of a balancing test there between the lowest price for ratepayers, but the most safety for ratepayers. So that we just wanted to bring that sort of to the table for discussion. And Mr. Bumpkin, if you could just move to the last page that I have here. I might think, yeah. Very last. One more page. Yeah, right there. We've been working with many of the battery manufacturers, in particular, a manufacturer out of Buffalo, and that actually is meeting the highest standards for manufacturing. And this is what our clients would propose as a minimum standard that all projects would have to meet in order to, qualify in the program. They would have to, at a minimum, meet UL 9540 and have testing under 9540A. They would have to demonstrate self-contained National Electric Manufacturers Association or NEMA enclosures. They'd have to show robust data acquisition, monitoring, and alarm systems for their projects. They would have to include protective relays, circuit breakers, and fuses, which would self-protect the project and the battery system in case of any electrical faults. Again, all of this to prevent fires and a thermal runaway, and have really robust battery cell thermal runaway detection and mitigation system plan in place. And it should be submitted in response to any RFP, and also have a viable battery disconnect from the grid if there were to be an event at a battery system. And lastly, they would need to disclose in their application to Pura all of the results of their 9540A testing, and to show, you know, where there were fires in their testing, so that so we have full disclosure. We think that these 5 protective measures, you know, will add some extra cost to a system. I kind of relate it to the old Pinto case, where they tried to say, the manufacturer tried to save money on the car, but it ended up, you know, costing lives. Where if they spent a little more on the car, we wouldn't have had these fires with the old Ford Pinto. So we don't want a Ford Pinto situation here. We want the highest standards, you know, in manufacturing standards to be used, and that to be demonstrated by any projects that are proposed. And in this way, we kind of balance the cost, cost of ratepayers with overall public safety, and I think in the long run would ensure a really robust and good front of the meter energy storage program. So that's what I have. That's my presentation, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. We'll turn first to authority staff, Mr. Arpin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to thank Attorney Michaud for his presentation today. So my first question, the UL 9540 certification has been successfully used in the ESS program for several years without requiring a bid preference, and multiple OEMs in the ESS program have obtained this certification. Given this, why would requiring the UL 9540 certification lead to higher cost for an FTM storage program requiring a bid preference?
Yeah, a bid preference is like one option. If everybody, if not every proposer meets the standard, then that's unfair, right? It wouldn't be a level playing field, and that's where the bid preference would come in. But if for example, the authority requires this upfront for any proposal, and if you don't meet it, you get kicked out, then there would be no need for a bid preference.
Okay, thank you for that response, Attorney Michaud. How many battery OEMs currently lack a UL 9540 certification that you're aware of? Is that commonplace that they don't have that certification?
I don't have exact numbers, but what's happening speaking with our industry partner, our partners, it's mostly happening on the smaller level, smaller projects. There are many projects, for example, that have purposely gone around the siting council, where the siting council's position is that all batteries should have gone before them. We actually submitted a project that was only 300 kW to the siting council, and they've opened up a docket on it because they were wondering why we were the only small project that had submitted. But the scrutiny we got for that very small project was huge. And I think what came out, and I can get that docket number for you, but I think the frustration they had at the siting council was that there was no standard. They weren't really sure how to approve the project, distance standard. And that's kind of what kind of led us to want to raise this more as an issue, because even the siting council was having trouble on, what they were really asking in their meeting, like, we really need some standards so that we know how to permit these projects.
Thank you for that response. Just out of curiosity, was that 300 kW project, was that an ESS project?
It was a small microgrid project in New Canaan at the YMCA.
Okay,
it was actually behind the meter project.
Now a couple more questions on the 9540. Do you have any information on the cost for a battery OEM to obtain this certification, and also any information on how long it would take a battery OEM to receive that certification?
I do not know. I can get that information. And again, I've been interviewing and doing tours of various manufacturing plants around the country. And it is an extra step. There's extra costs. I can, if it's okay, I could quantify that from you from the actual manufacturers.
I think
And
that
it's
would be
time.
helpful. Thank you, Attorney Michaud.
Yeah.
Now my final question, it's not directed toward you, but it's directed toward the ESS program administrator, so the EDCs or the Connecticut Green Bank, if they're still on the line. Would the ESS program administrators like to provide any additional insights on the discussion of the UL 9540 certification? Because I know it's used for the ESS program too, including how common it is among battery OEMs, as well as the cost and timeline for obtaining this certification. I don't know if the Green Bank would like to take a stab at that first.
Yeah, Mr. Arpin, we're still here. As you know, every battery that is allowed into the ESS has the UL 9540. That is a requirement to participate in our program. There have been instances where the OEM does not have UL 9540. I believe it's been a few months, but it takes only months. It's not a long time.
So would you say then that that's fairly rare for an OEM applying to not have that certification?
No, I wouldn't say that. One of the most common delays in coming into the program has been the absence of the UL 9540. So it's very common to not have it.
Okay, thank you for that response. With the EDCs administering the ESS program, did they have any additional information on the 9540 certification that they may want to add here?
Mr. Arpin, this is Rob Whalen from United Illuminating. I can comment on that. So I believe we have an order, and this is stemming from, I believe, year two or year three of the Energy Storage Solutions docket. But we're waiting the state. So the UL 9540 certification is specific to ESS. It has not been implemented at the state building and fire code level yet. I believe the next time the state is going to adopt the latest version of the fire code, which has a storage component to it, as well as the UL 9540, I think is in October, if I remember correctly. And that's the Department of Administrative Services that oversees that. So once that's implemented, I think it's going to be mandated for any storage coming into the state to have that certification beyond just the ESS program.
Okay, thank you for that response.
You're welcome.
Now I have another question that came up for Attorney Michaud. In your view, is the issue you've identified a public perception of battery safety unique to Connecticut? Why or why not?
It's not unique to Connecticut. There have been high-profile fires, in California, around the country. What we're finding out, and again, it's really at the siting council level, is that these high-profile fire events and thermal runaway events have made the news, and it has spooked a lot of people. Like when we do our siting council proposals, we send out a butter list. We send it out to the governmental authorities, and it's been pretty universal that they're coming back with that concern about, is this thing going to, catch on fire and burn, through our neighborhood. It's been very, very consistent. Yeah, we've had to really work hard at proving the safety of our projects, to the point we only seek out manufacturers who actually meet these high goals, in order to help the abutters, the people in the area or the community feel better about the project. And I'm just concerned, we see this as a real barrier to really expanding the program, it's going to happen a lot. In Connecticut, it is a national problem, but in Connecticut, it's what people are generally very well aware of it because of the high profile events.
Thank you for that response, Attorney Michaud. And those are all of my questions. So I thank you again for your presentation and time today, and I turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Charles, any questions?
No additional questions from me. Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for one, maybe two questions from any other stakeholders before we turn to our lunch break. If there are any. Okay, seeing none, Attorney Michaud, thank you very much for your presentation, for addressing our questions this morning. Thank you. All right, we're going to take our lunch break. We will adjourn or we'll recess until 12:45, at which time we will reconvene with a presentation from the Alliance for Climate Transmission, Renew Northeast, and SIA. Thank you. Okay, good afternoon and welcome back to our technical meeting. We are going to prepare to turn to our next presentation. So I want to welcome to the virtual stage all of our presenters from the next group. We have the Alliance for Climate Transmission, Renew Northeast, and Solar Energy Industry Association. So welcome those folks, and same opening question to you if you'd like to control your own slides or if you'd like Mr. Bumpin to.
Good afternoon. I think it'd probably be great if you want to control them, Chair Gillette. Thank you.
Excellent. We'll get those pulled up. Welcome.
Okay. Looks good. Ready? Oops. Okay. Well, everybody, we'll get right to it. I'm Natalie Treat. I'm the Director of Public Policy at the Alliance for Climate Transition Act, and I'm here just to say hello on behalf of our partner trade groups, Renew Northeast and SEIA's Northeast chapter, the Solar Energy Industries Association. So we are representing many dozens of storage developers, large and small, that are doing business or seeking to do business in Connecticut. And I'm pleased to introduce our panelists, Sean, Lisa, and Alex, who will speak on behalf of our coalition. Their organizations are members of one or more of our groups, and what they're going to comment on is consistent with the written comments that we submitted in February, and I believe addressing some of the points we've heard this morning. So I will turn it right over. Thank you. Alex.
I think Sean's going to go first.
Great, thanks. And if we don't mind moving to the next slide. While that's happening, my name is Sean Burke. I'm the Director of Policy for Blue Wave Energy. We are a community solar and energy storage developer, and we've been participating in this docket or in the development of this for a while now, and we're excited to see this continue moving forward. So first, we wanted to underscore through this presentation why we believe front-of-the-meter energy storage provides value to Connecticut's ratepayers and to the state's goals. First, focusing on ratepayer benefits, the analysis that SEA and CES did as part of the front-of-the-meter working group that I believe resulted in a report in late 2023 showed a ratepayer impact measure result of at least 2.4 to 1 ratepayer benefits to costs in the multiple incentive levels analyzed. And in response to question CAE-003, that RIM was updated and also made specific to Connecticut. So the RIM Connecticut showed ratepayer benefits of roughly 2.38, showing the durability of ratepayer benefits over a couple of years or a year and a half since the last analysis, and showing that these ratepayer benefits continue to be strong from the deployment of energy storage in Connecticut. Beyond ratepayer value, the front-of-the-meter energy storage provides other societal and economic benefits that aren't captured in the RIM. We obviously agree with focusing on the RIM, but it's important to note that there are other benefits outside of the strict ratepayer impact measure test that energy storage provides through jobs, through greenhouse gas emissions reductions, or the integration of renewables that aren't captured in the RIM. And lastly, the program can result in benefits being realized in the near term. Front-of-the-meter energy storage developers have been developing or advancing projects in anticipation of this program for years. And as such, many are in advanced stages of development, allowing for near-term deployment that would deliver the ratepayer benefits previously mentioned quickly, and would also quickly contribute to the state's 1,000 megawatt energy storage goal that by 2030. And that is an additional benefit from this. We'll talk about the project maturity requirements that would ensure this later on, but just wanted to focus on that now. Next slide, please. And we also wanted to level set on how we've been thinking about the program design, and hopefully this is helpful to go over. But we are recommending a walk-up, first ready, first served incentive design, which means that whenever a project meets the program's applicable project maturity requirements, it would be able to apply into the program at a set compensation level and would reserve that allocation rather than a competitive procurement. We, as the Green Bank mentioned, we also believe this is preferable to a competitive procurement because it allows for a more steady project and market development. Resources know what compensation level they will be provided when they reach these strong maturity requirements that we're recommending. And so this allows developers to move forward with confidence. It reduces kind of start-stop in the market that you might see with a procurement where developers stop development and wait for the next solicitation to occur before continuing to move forward. And it also reduces the impact of attrition when paired with strong maturity requirements, because you can have stronger maturity requirements in a walk-up program than you can in a competitive procurement. And then I know there's a lot to unpack on the jurisdictional issues, but we don't believe that this design would implicate federal jurisdictional issues as resources aren't being paid to participate in the wholesale markets, aren't being compensated for, required to participate in wholesale markets, but are instead being compensated for delivering ratepayer benefits as identified in the RIM tests. And these resources would still buy and sell energy in the wholesale markets. Our terminology may not have been the most artful here, but we would still buy and sell energy in the wholesale markets, making us eligible for the WDAT rates under this design. Next slide, please. I think I pretty much already went over this, but again, we're continuing to develop our comments based on the assumption that we're looking at an active-only program design with merchant wholesale market participation allowed, but not required through the program, and that we would receive a compensation based on our participation in utility called events in dollars per kilowatt year, very similar to the active dispatch or almost identical to the active dispatch portion of the behind the meter energy storage solutions program, which hopefully allows for this program to be designed relatively quickly, given that it's something the state is already doing. Next slide, please. This kind of goes over or shows what I talked about on the first slide that I was covering. So I won't spend a lot of time here, but this shows all of the relevant benefit cost tests based on a $220 per kilowatt year compensation level. And yeah, I won't go into this any deeper, but it's just to confirm what we were saying at the very beginning, that there are strong ratepayer benefits from this. And I believe that's it for me, and I'll turn it over to Alex.
Great. Thank you, Sean. Hopefully you guys can hear me. I'm Alex Worsley. I'm a consultant at Stack Energy Consulting. In this proceeding, we're representing 9 Energy, which is another distributed storage developer who's been actively participating in these conversations and is excited to have the opportunity to present today. So thank you for that background, Sean. I think that provided us a nice level setting in terms of how we were thinking about these programs coming into this docket. On the next couple of slides, we move to answering specific questions that Pierre has proposed, starting with some high level thoughts on the procurement model itself, and then we'll dive into some of the specific questions regarding program size, program cap, eligibility requirements, and things like that. So, I think Sean mentioned some of these to start off with, but I think we really want to stress here that we have significant concerns with a procurement model for these types of assets for this market segment. We don't believe that a procurement model is the most efficient and effective way to incentivize and deploy and develop front-of-the-meter distribution connected projects. I really wanted to draw a difference, or draw your attention to the difference here between front-of-the-meter distribution connected assets and front-of-the-meter transmission connected assets. We think that the development cycle or the development process on our end looks different for those types of assets. And that kind of translates into why we think the procurement model doesn't work as well for the distribution connected assets. For the most part, on the distribution side, we are developing these kinds of assets on a portfolio basis. We're looking at multiple projects as opposed to on the transmission side when you might be looking at one larger project. And when you have multiple projects in a portfolio, understanding and having certainty in program design, the opportunities to be able to participate and the price at which those you might be able to participate with those assets is really critical for ensuring that you're able to continue to make investment decisions on that portfolio of assets. So that's why we've been focused in on the program design, because we think that that provides a lot greater level of certainty in terms of the opportunity to be able to participate with these assets, as well as the price. Ensuring that there is high confidence in the certainty in the price and in the program opportunities is really key. And we think that the discrete limited opportunities in a procurement makes that really challenging, why we really don't think it's going to work for this market segment. We think of these assets kind of in the same way that we think about projects that are participating in ESS, whereas, smaller projects, kind of across the region participating in a portfolio. Before we turn into the specific questions, I just want to make one other caveat here on the procurement mechanism. We provide, our thoughts on some of the specific parameters regarding the procurement in response to the questions, but want to caveat all of it by saying that some of our responses might vary depending on exactly what the procurement design looks like. We weren't clear, I think, based on the initial notice, what exactly that procurement would look like. I think you heard that echoed in a number of different commenters in the first round of comments, that it's not exactly clear what a procurement would look like. And we think that maybe some of these answers and responses might change depending on exactly what those final parameters are. So with that caveat, can we turn to the next slide? And maybe this slide doesn't vary too much on program design between procurements or a program and independent of kind of the procurement design. But on the program megawatt cap, we share a lot of the same thoughts as the Connecticut Green Bank, which I think you heard about earlier, that we think that this program should target kind of the missing market segment in Connecticut, that 220 megawatts that hasn't been either allocated through a deep procurement or through the ESS program. But we also agree that because of the attrition rates that we've seen in other programs, not only in Connecticut, but kind of across the region, that there is going to be the potential for attrition. So ensure to kind of counteract that from the onset of the program to oversize the program a little bit. We've assumed kind of in our initial take here about an oversize of about 20%. And I think that the program should target at least initially 275 megawatts. If we could turn to the next slide. As we mentioned, I think Sean mentioned it, and we think that we can also take additional steps to help mitigate some of those attrition concerns, and think that kind of our lessons learned from the ESS program is that we need to have strong eligibility requirements and strong project maturity requirements to be able to participate in this program. That's part of the reason that we've proposed this first serve walk-up incentive program. We think that very much aligns with the goals of ensuring that there is lower project attrition by ensuring that there's higher projects are only able to participate when they're sufficiently far along in the development cycle. So for that kind of program, we would recommend that these projects have signed ISAs and all of their non-ministerial permits kind of already done, completed before they're able to participate in the program, because that would ensure that those projects are more likely to move forward in the process. And we'll note that for procurements, those maturity requirements might need to be adjusted because there are more limited opportunities to participate. Aligning the procurement schedule with those development timelines becomes very tricky. And to ensure that you are receiving kind of the most robust pool of projects, some of those maturity requirements might need to be relaxed in order to make sure that there's enough projects. So that does increase the risk of project attrition, which is another reason why we're kind of supporting the program design overall. I think that is my slide, so I'll turn it over to Lisa to cover the rest of the questions.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So I'm just going to wrap us up here with a couple more comments and bring us to the end of our presentation. I'm Lisa Boba. I'm an energy storage manager with NextAmp. We're a community solar and storage company based out of Boston and have also been involved in the storage dockets in Connecticut for a couple of years now. So I think these we have listed as other comments, but they may have been questions associated with our comments we filed as well. So the first point or thing we would like to know is in the development of a front of the meter distribution connected energy storage program, it would be most beneficial to the program and the system to focus on 4-hour batteries for a couple of reasons. So these resources will be most heavily represented in the market and they're better positioned to access additional revenue streams in the wholesale market. So like Sean talked about, the way that we were thinking about this program and the way that it was studied previously included a pay for performance incentive and then merchant revenues. So 4-hour batteries, they can better leverage energy arbitrage markets and capacity markets if allowed and basically get higher revenues, increasing the revenue stack there, making these projects more financeable and more likely to come to fruition and be operating in the state. But not only the revenue stack, but when we're looking at the scarcity issues that we're trying to solve for the distribution grid in Connecticut and in the region, as we go into the future, these mid-duration batteries become more and more important as renewable generation increases. And you can see across many other states in the region and across the country, the focus is really moving from 2 to 4+ hour batteries. So it's just our recommendation that in this future FTM program to focus on a 4-hour battery there. So we can move on to the next slide. And then this, I think, wraps us up with our comments as a comment on program duration. So here, the punchline is that stability in a program is vital for financing, for knowing what's going to happen and getting projects built. That's both from incentive levels and also from program duration. So I think we have comments here based on what we think is the best program duration if we're talking about a first ready, first serve walk-up program that we were proposing, but also in the case of a procurement. So for a first ready, first served program, we would encourage a 10-year incentive lock and then a 20-year program duration. And then for a procurement, if that's the route that's gone, a 20-year contract, it would be what industry would recommend. And that just allows these battery storage projects to be more financeable and actually get the funding to be built. That like line of sight and reliability out into the future is really critical for us to be able to beat hurdle rates and build projects at the end of the day. And then getting back to that point of the 4-hour duration and then the future and grid needs of the future, the longer the program is acted as renewable generation increases and makes up a larger share of the generation on the grid, we can presume that the active dispatch program will be needed years out into the future as well. So that's the final point there. We can move on to the next slide, which
maybe pass it back to Natalie, but that was it. Those were our points there.
Thanks, Lisa, and thanks to our team. Chair Gillette, we're happy to answer questions.
Great, thank you so much. So we'll turn first to Christopher Urban on my staff, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the Clean Energy Trade Groups for their presentation and time today. So my first question, Mr. Bumpin, could you please turn to slide 3? So my first question, if known, roughly how many Connecticut FTM storage projects are currently in advanced stages of development within the interconnection queue?
That's a great question. I don't have the answer off the top of my head. I will say there's many that are in the interconnection queue. I think it's safe to say there are some that have signed ISAs at this point. And there are projects that are at the siting council as well, that are front of the meter energy storage resources. I don't unfortunately have exact numbers right now.
Would you be able to give like a ballpark figure if you don't have exact numbers, or is that still difficult?
I don't. I'm sure the utilities might have better information on what's in the queue right now. Unfortunately, I don't.
Okay, thank you for that response. Now I'd like to turn to slide 4, please. So my question here, how does a first ready, first served procurement model avoid violating federal jurisdictional issues?
Yeah, caveating that I am not a lawyer and we will be responding, I believe, through Act to the request for comments that Pura put out regarding this. I think what we say on the slide here, our belief is that this does not implicate federal jurisdiction because we are not being paid to participate in the wholesale markets, but to deliver ratepayer benefits. That's kind of the distinction that for us separates the jurisdictional question. And we would still be, as it says on the slide, buying and selling energy. So the sale for resale that was talked about earlier in the wholesale markets, while providing ratepayer benefits and being compensated for those separate from our participation in the wholesale market. But I believe we will have additional information in response to the request for comments.
Thank you for that response. So the clean energy trade groups have a similar view if a competitive procurement approach were adopted?
I can.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, Alex.
Yeah, I would say it probably will depend on what that competitive procurement looks like, and what products and services are being procured within that competitive procurement. So I think the answer is going to depend. We can probably try and provide a little bit of color on potential options and or our potential thoughts on different avenues under competitive procurement within our comments in response to the brief. But I think without having a clearer idea of what exactly the procurement looks like, I think it's going to be hard to or difficult to answer that question.
Thank you for that response, and I think that authority staff would appreciate any additional comments, be provided in the Clean Energy Trade Group's response to the notice of written comments that was recently filed. Now, staying on this slide, how does a first ready, first served incentive structure help reduce financing costs for FTM storage projects compared to a competitive procurement model?
Yeah, I can start, and others can fill in. The financing costs come from the uncertainty. So if we're having to develop a project without certainty that there is a compensation program that would be available, basically if we're developing without knowing whether we'll be awarded a procurement that is a riskier prospect, and therefore that increases the financing costs of the project.
Thank you for that response. Staying on this slide, if known, which other jurisdictions use a first ready, first served storage procurement model, and what are the key characteristics of those programs?
Yeah, one is the New York retail storage incentive program. That is I guess a first ready, first served, similar project maturity requirements to what we've proposed here, and resources that participate in the retail storage incentive program also participate in New York's VEDR, Value of Distributed Energy Resources program. And so that's the general structure of New York's. Alex or Lisa, are there others that we want to flag?
Not for front of the meter, that are currently running, but I would say that there's storage proceedings going on in other states, like in New Jersey and Maryland, that tend to look towards the New York model as a best practice for the retail segment here.
Thank you for that response. Staying on the slide, do specific program design choices, such as a competitive procurement model versus a first ready, first served approach, favor certain technologies or types of FTM storage? Why or why not?
I think I'll try. I think that generally the types of storage that you will see respond to either a procurement or a program design will depend heavily on the eligibility and requirements set forward in those program designs. So I think that you could see both a procurement or a program design favor a certain type of technology within those parameters, but I don't think either model necessarily from just a structure standpoint favor a specific technology type or duration type.
Thank you for that response. Now I'd like to turn to slide 7, please. So my question here, would adopting maturity requirements for competitive procurement address concerns about project attrition? Why or why not?
Sure. I definitely think that adopting maturity requirements can help address project attrition. However, because of the discrete nature of how competitive solicitations are normally run, I do think that there is greater risk associated with procurements over a program because you are there are going to be only discrete opportunities to participate. You then have to align your development timelines with those very discrete opportunities, and those might misalign more than they would if you're able to enter or apply to a program when that project hits and is ready. So that's part of the reason why we believe that a program design is more preferable, but that's not to say that project maturity requirements wouldn't go to help the issue, but we just don't think it's going to solve it all the way.
And maybe if I could just add on to that, with the procurement model, you'd likely need less strict maturity requirements than with a first ready, first served, because the cost of securing ISA and permit without knowing whether you'll be awarded in a procurement can be prohibitive for developers to get to without clarity on whether there will be revenue for that project available. And so that may limit your, either the ability to, it'll either limit the project's maturity requirements or perhaps limit the pool of competitive bidders in that solicitation.
I appreciate those responses. Now I'd like to turn to slide 10, please. So my question here, why are 4-hour battery storage systems more prevalent in the FTM market compared to systems with shorter durations, such as those under 4 hours?
So I can take a stab, and then Alex and Sean, if you want to fill in. I would say, so I think right now where the market is, they may not be more prevalent. But is where the market is going. And so if you look at, for example, the way the New York retail incentive program is structured and how the cap, like the size cap on a project works for those incentives, it's structured for a 4-hour battery. And if you also look at upcoming procurements in Massachusetts coming out of their studies and their state of charge report, they have specific mid-duration procurements coming down the line in the next 3 years, mid-duration being 4-hour batteries, or like around 4 hours. Besides the revenue potential in wholesale markets, I think that it's the ability of a longer duration battery to respond to scarcity events for the duration of that event. And in studies that have been done, and we can maybe reference some of these in the next round of comments, but in Massachusetts or New York and California, when they're looking at that renewable generation coming online, these scarcity events turn into longer duration events because of the percentage of renewable generation on the grid versus non-renewable.
Thank you.
Agree.
Oh, go
Agree with
ahead.
everything Lisa said. Sorry, just one more to add on to that. The ISO is undergoing a process to update how they treat the capacity of energy storage resources called effective load carrying capability, or ELCC, which is reducing the capacity value of 2-hour duration resources in relation to 4-hour resources. And I think so part of that is the market responding to ISO and wholesale signals for longer duration in response to what Lisa said to ensure that we're meeting scarcity events.
Thank you for those responses. So Ms. Boba, I think you said that they're not prevalent right now, but they're expected to be prevalent in the future. Do you have any idea of what that timeline might be when the prevalence of 4-hour batteries would increase?
Yeah, I mean, maybe not as prevalent as 2-hour batteries that are operational right now. I would say the next round of procurements and opening blocks like in the region have in-service dates in the next couple of years. So if you expect a procurement or a project to be participating in a program in 2025, they tend to have in-service dates of 2027. So that, I mean, this is a little bit of timeline conjecture, but in the next couple of years for sure. I don't know if Alex or Sean want to correct me or add there.
No, I'll just say, we've focused our development on 4 hours. So all of ours are 4 hours.
Thank you for those responses. So staying on this topic, and I believe that this was answered somewhat in a previous question, but just to dig in a little more, how do the cost and ratepayer benefits of 4-hour FTM battery storage systems compare to those of shorter duration systems?
And that's a very good question. So obviously a larger battery is more expensive, right? But I think you have to get into the details of the benefit side too, and then also the like offsetting revenue stack. So I think it depends on how the authority decides to structure their program and their incentive and setting their incentive levels or whatever compensation levels in a way that meets their required benefit cost ratios. And then the market has to do the work on their side to bridge the gap there. Yeah, so I don't know, if there's anything else to add, but.
Thank you for that response. Staying on this topic, how could a procurement model focus on active dispatch participation and demand response be specifically tailored to support specific durations of battery storage systems, such as 4-hour battery storage?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, come off mute, Sean.
Sure. I think the point here is to ensure that the program design doesn't preclude different durations of resources. I think, the active dispatch model, looking at the behind the meter program, I believe it's 1 to 3 hour calls. So that would align well with allowing a 4-hour resource to participate. And would, 4-hour resources could then also be more likely to hit all 3 hours if there's additional capacity in the battery. So I think essentially we're trying to ensure that the program design, and this stems from I think from the front of meter working group, where a lot of the analysis focused on a 2-hour battery. So just ensuring that 4-hour resources are eligible and the program is not kind of prohibiting them. Because it's a pay for performance design. So if a 4-hour resource didn't perform, it wouldn't be paid. So it should be more based on performance, more so than arbitrarily limiting duration, if that makes sense.
Thank you for that response. Now I'd like to turn to slide 11, please. So my final question, what is the anticipated operational lifespan of an FTM battery storage project?
Sure, 20 years. So I think most of your tier 1 batteries or any battery out there have warranties ranging from 15 to 20 years. So I would say 20 years is the standard.
Okay, thank you for that response. And I would like to thank the Clean Energy Trade Groups again for their presentation and time today. And I turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We'll take questions from Ms. Charles, please.
Thank you. I think I'm good on my questions.
Okay, very good. Let's see. I think we have time for 1, maybe 2 questions from stakeholders on the presentation, if there are any.
This is Jennifer. I can't figure out how to raise my hand, but I did have some follow-up on the slide 4, which they may or may not be able to answer. So, but I just 2 follow-ups. Just to be clear, on the number 2, on the final paragraph, and you said resources would still buy and sell energy in the wholesale markets. We already clarified that the WDETs were only going to be used for the delivery. Do you guys, do you have a position? I'm trying to reconcile the beginning of the sentence with the end, because, buying and selling energy in the wholesale markets is a FERC well, the selling is a FERC jurisdictional activity. The buying is not. But are you by this sentence trying to say that's not a FERC jurisdictional activity? Or are you just saying you don't have an opinion at this time and will let us know on briefs?
I don't think we disagree with you that buying and selling under WDET, or buying and selling in the wholesale markets, delivery through WDET, appreciate the distinction there and policies for the unclear language there. We agree that it is jurisdictional. So no disagreement there. I think in terms of how then that interacts with an incentive payment, I don't know if the entire collective group has a position on that yet, but we are, I guess, planning on providing additional thoughts if we can come to consensus as a group within the brief.
And I understand the concept of, the notion of the incentive payment is for ratepayer benefits. It's just, you could say, there could be a program where the incentive is we're going to give you this much money because you're providing ratepayer benefits. But what I'm confused about is you keep talking about the active participation and being paid if dispatched. And that's where I'm sort of running into the problem of going back to the Talon v. Hughes issue is paying someone to be dispatched is very different than paying them for overall ratepayer benefits and paying the incentive, if dispatched when told to dispatch, raises the Hughes v. Talon issue, whereas being paid just a lump sum for ratepayer benefits doesn't, raise the same issues. So that's why, there was a lot of talk about active dispatch and that type of thing. And I was just confused, how you keep how you get away from the problem of an incentive tied to dispatch, which runs into this federal law issue. It's really a supremacy clause issue, versus being paid just for a lump sum of ratepayer benefits.
Yeah, I appreciate your point, Jen. I think we'll respond more fully in the brief. I'll say that, we had worked with the EDCs on kind of developing and working on this proposal in the working group, a year and a half ago or so. I think we'll definitely provide some thoughts there and how to get around or how to address concerns related to Talon and Hughes. I think the impetus behind tying it to some performance metric was a desire to ensure that these assets are performing under a certain set of expectations. That's the rationale behind it, recognizing that there are these other considerations that I think we're going to need to address. And, we look forward to continuing to have that conversation with the EDCs and stakeholders on the best way to do so.
Yeah, and I'll be the first to admit till I came, till we came into the lawyers came into the picture, I don't think it was necessarily clear to other people on some of the utility teams, what what the effect of Hughes v. Talon is on, models that involve payment for participation, unfortunately. And, it was not great to be late to the game, but, now that we're here, we do need to address them because, we would expect at some point there will be storage participating in the market that's not being, paid an incentive, and they would not be happy to be competing against, someone being paid an incentive to, to sell into the market and or to be dispatched, which means presumably you are selling into the market or you wouldn't be dispatched. Although there's the other model, but anyway, I'll leave my questions there.
Okay, thank you. I see Attorney Wheel's hand. Give him the last word before we wrap up our agenda here.
Thank you, Chairman. I just had a quick question. There was some brief discussion about financing costs, and I was just curious if there's been a comparison between the expected financing costs and the utilities authorized weighted average cost of capital.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow the question.
Yeah, I'm just curious we know that with the utilities current weighted average cost of capital, like for Eversource is I think 7.09%, and UI is 6.475%. I was just curious if the financing costs you had referenced before, how they would compare to those rates.
I am not sure off the top of my head.
Yeah, I would say we don't have a good answer prepared today. that's something that Peer is interested in having us respond to, I think we'd be able to do so within kind of discovery here. It might depend on developer to developer as well. We're representing kind of industry on this call, so I'm not sure we have a great response to summarize everybody's separate financing costs here. Though if asked, I think we would be able to potentially provide some color in a general sense. Though wouldn't expect to get individual developers exact financing costs.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Chairman. That was my only question.
Great, thank you. Well, then let me thank the team for your presentation and for addressing all the questions this afternoon.
Thank you, Chair, and we'll do our best to address things in our next set of written comments due, I believe, on the 15th of April.
Excellent, thank you. Thanks. Okay, are there any members of the public, stakeholders who have not had an opportunity to offer comment? Again, I'm not seeking questions, but if anyone had a comment that they wanted to register before we adjourn. Okay, if not, that brings us to the end of today's agenda. I want to thank everyone for the presentations and robust discussion. As has been mentioned a few times, we do have a couple of outstanding comment opportunities and briefs and a set of interrogatories, I believe, that are out there. All three of those are due no later than 4 p.m. on April 15th. So please make sure you get those in on time. And subsequent to that, we have a second technical meeting scheduled, which will again be held remotely. And that is scheduled for 9 a.m. on April 25th. So thank you very much for participating in today's technical meeting, and we are adjourned.